Like, this is why he's a lib, you know what I mean? Because, like, Boasberg is not exactly a woke libtard himself, you know what I mean? He's a conservative judge that would have probably processed all of these deportations in the most expeditious manner. But the only reason why I didn't is because, you know, there was clearly no.
We have an update. Things have gotten worse. Things have gotten much, much worse. And honestly, despite everything that's happening in the world, I think this ought to be the most important news story in the country. Now, these actions triggered a wave of lawsuits that we previously covered. Then at the 11th hour, Judge Boasberg swooped in to save the day, ordering the government to turn the planes around. Then the government thumbed its nose at the order and continued to send people to the gulag with zero opportunity for due process, while simultaneously declaring that their inability to do so was an emergency worthy of a stay by the DC Circuit Court and eventually the Supreme Court. Now, this broke with 249 years of American legal precedent, and this could very well be the beginning of the end of one of our country's founding legal principles, the right to due process. None of the individuals detained have ever been found guilty of any crime, nor were any of them charged with one. In fact, most of them were on the government's radar because they were attempting to go through the US immigration system the legal way, via immigration courts. And yet Donald Trump has appointed himself their judge, jury, and executioner.
They emptied jails out, other nations emptied their jails into the United States. That's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals. Drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion.
Whether citizen or not, anyone detained by the US is entitled to due process as a constitutional right. But those rights are in question now. So first, a quick refresher of the facts, horrifying as they are. The named plaintiffs, identified only by their initials, are a group of 5 Venezuelan nationals who are being detained by the government. The lead plaintiff, JGG, arrived in the United States in March of 2024 and sought asylum. According to his court filings, he fled Venezuela because he had been tortured, arbitrarily imprisoned, and beaten by the Venezuelan police, whom he claimed will continue to retaliate against him because his stepfather is a political dissident. Like many of the other plaintiffs in this case, JGG was already going through the legal steps of the immigration process. He even had a hearing scheduled regarding his asylum application. And I will remind you, asylum is legal immigration. And while it may or may not be true that everything he has alleged is true, that's the purpose of the asylum process, to determine if it's true. And if it is, at the end of that process, he would be granted asylum and would be a legal resident in the United States. Apparently, though, that process was moving too slowly for the Trump administration because instead of waiting for the immigration system to properly adjudicate JGG's asylum case by doing, inefficiency, allowing him to have a hearing and requiring adjudication by a neutral third party, the administration detained him and then presented JGG, a native Spanish speaker, with papers in English while falsely claiming that he was going to be released. Once he signed those papers under that false pretense, the government whisked him away to a detention center in Texas. At 3 o'clock in the morning on March 14th, 2025, he was awakened by the guards and told that he was going to be transferred somewhere else. The guards refused to specify where he was going to be sent or why. That transfer was apparently thwarted by a mechanical problem with the plane, which allowed JGG to contact his attorney and file this lawsuit on the morning of March 15th. And I will also remind you that the plaintiffs were not seeking full residency in the United States. They were simply asking for regular due process and to let the process of the immigration courts play out. But in their lawsuit, plaintiffs stated that they had heard that the Trump administration planned to invoke the Alien Enemies Act to remove Venezuelans to El Salvador's notorious prison, the Terrorism Confinement Center. And as we've discussed before, the Alien Enemies Act is a 1798 law that was designed to give the president sweeping power to expel immigrants in times of war, and it has rarely been invoked since. And to be clear, when I say that El Salvador's Terrorism Confinement Center is a torture prison, I'm not exaggerating. The BBC published a shocking expose on the prison in 2023, highlighting its various human rights abuses, which included overcrowding, no windows, fans, or air conditioners to combat the year-round tropical heat, no outside recreation, and no familial visitation. Salvadoran officials have proclaimed that they don't expect the prisoners will ever be released. According to court filings, police beat newcomers to the prison with batons, prisoners are sent to dark basement cells where they're beaten daily, and one prisoner even required an operation for a ruptured pancreas and spleen. Scholars have stated that 375 detainees have died in Bukele's Salvadoran gulags, but some estimate that—
Bro, this stuff is so heinous. They got LegalEagle to start making videos that are more overtly political than ever before. I feel like in the past, he always towed this line. He's always been a liberal for sure, and you can tell, but rarely does he ever make like, I feel like he doesn't, he normally wouldn't go this hard on anything. He's a liberal for sure. but in his commentary, you can kind of get a sense that like he defends the infallibility of institutions in general. He's not going to go above and beyond in terms of his commentary. Him, Philip DeFranco, many of these other guys, CoffeeZilla, regardless of their own personal biases, I feel like their commentary on issues such as this one have often been more restrained. And slowly but surely, you see his commentary evolve through the process where it's just like they're sending people to a concentration camp.
The number is more than 1,000. So upon hearing that the president was about to invoke the Alien Enemies Act to send them to a prison, the plaintiffs understandably were terrified and implored the D.C. District Court to issue a TRO preventing them from being extraordinarily renditioned to El Salvador based on the groundless whims of the Trump administration. And later that same day, the Trump administration confirmed the rumors by issuing a proclamation declaring that it was invoking the Alien Enemies Act to apprehend, detain, and remove members of the Tren de Aragua gang, a violent Venezuelan gang that has been designated as a terrorist organization. Is staging an invasion or predatory incursion on behalf of or in collaboration with Venezuela's dictator Nicolas Maduro. Now, if you think that that seems a bit of a stretch, I'm with you, and we'll get to that in a bit. But the government has claimed that JGG and the rest of the plaintiffs are being renditioned because they are members of Tren de Aragua. The plaintiffs have all argued that this is not true. Several plaintiffs have pointed out that the government's suspicions are based on the specious fact that they have tattoos, including a tattoo of an eye and
a tattoo of mom and dad, a tattoo of autism awareness. It is such an insanely high bar of punishment for such a low bar to clear. It's just like, I've never seen something so erroneous. It might as well be just like, I've decided your vibes are off, so sorry, you're going to fucking perma jail.
The government has provided no evidence to support this assertion that any of the members are in fact members of Tren de Aragua. Now, in ordinary times, there are actual processes for adjudicating these kinds of questions of fact, and they're called courts. This is why courts exist. If the administration wanted to credibly accuse the plaintiffs of membership in Tren de Aragua, they could have pursued criminal charges or allowed plaintiffs to continue to work their way through the immigration system. But instead of gathering evidence and laying out a case against the plaintiffs, the Trump administration just stamped them with the gang members designation and sent them for an indefinite stay in a Salvadoran gulag. D.C. District Court Judge Boasberg came in on March 15th by issuing a TRO from removing any of the individuals.
Like, this is why he's a lib, you know what I mean? Because like Boasberg is not exactly a woke libtard himself, you know what I mean? He's a conservative judge that would have probably processed all of these deportations in the most expeditious manner, but the only reason why I didn't is because, you know, there was clearly no due process.
Individual plaintiffs from the United States for 14 days. Judge Boasberg also provisionally certified a larger class of plaintiffs, specifying that all non-citizens in U.S. custody who are subject to Trump's proclamation also could not be removed for 14 days. And in the March 15th hearing, Judge Boasberg told the Trump administration's attorney that, quote, "You shall inform your clients of the order immediately, and that any plane containing members of the class that is going to take off or is in the air needs to be returned to the United States." As Judge Boasberg later pointed out, his orders were quite narrow. He said, quote, "Neither order required the government to release a single individual from its custody. Neither order prevented the government from apprehending anyone pursuant to the just published proclamation, and neither order prevented the government from deporting anyone, including plaintiffs, through authorities other than the proclamation, such as the Immigration and Nationality Act." And indeed, as the plaintiff last month designated Tren de Aragua a foreign organization, members of that gang are already inadmissible to, and thus deportable from, the United States under the Immigration and Nationality Act. Now, the Trump administration, desperate to avoid having to actually present evidence before indefinitely detaining people in a prison, filed an appeal to the D.C. Circuit that same day. In the meantime, while the Circuit Court appeal was pending, the Trump administration decided to continue renditioning people out of the U.S. in contravention of Judge Boasberg's March 15th TRO. According to the government's own statements, 2 planes left prior to Judge Boasberg's ruling and would have been in the air and thus still subject to his order at the time that the order was issued. Indeed, the administration bragged about his continued non-compliance, declaring on March 31st, after Judge Boasberg had extended the TRO until April 12th, that, quote, "Last night in a successful counterterrorism operation with our allies in El Salvador, the United States military transferred a group of 17 violent criminals from the Tren de Aragua and MS-13 organizations, including..." So on March 16th, Judge Boasberg set another hearing to discuss the Trump administration's non-compliance, and the administration filed a motion to vacate the hearing. arguing that the court lacks jurisdiction to, quote, interfere with the president's national security and foreign affairs authority, led by Pam Bondi. Trump's Department of Justice had the temerity to argue that because Judge Boasberg's more specific order to turn those planes around was issued orally, it wasn't actually an order. It was really more of a suggestion. Yes, that's what they actually argued in court. Judge Boasberg was apparently unimpressed with the administration's legal wrangling because he held the hearing anyway and ordered the government to submit sworn declarations certifying that no one on any flight departing after the TRO was issued had been removed solely on the basis of the Alien Enemies Act. He also ordered the Trump administration to specify when the proclamation was signed, made public, and went into effect, and how many individuals subject to the proclamation are still in the U.S. and in U.S. custody. The administration responded that it didn't think that it needed to answer the judge's questions about the flights, but that if it must answer those questions, it will only do so in camera or with an ex parte declaration, meaning that they would only do it in the judge's chambers outside of the eyes of anyone else. Now that was strange because the administration had broadly publicized many details of these renditions. Bukele himself had posted on Twitter on March 16th stating, quote, today the first 238 members of the Venezuelan criminal organization Tren de Aragua arrived in our country. They were immediately transferred to SCOTUS, the Terrorism Confinement Center, for a period of 1 year renewable. The United States will pay a very low fee for them, but a high one for us. Bukele also bragged about how the prisoners in SCOTUS are being used as slave labor, stating, quote, over time, these actions, combined with the production already being generated by more than 40,000 inmates engaged in various workshops and labor under the Zero Idleness program, will make our prison system self-sustainable. In response to these declarations, Secretary of State Marco Rubio replied on Twitter, quote, thank you for your assistance and friendship, President Bukele. So it was clear that the administration wasn't exactly keeping this a secret, and it was odd that they would argue to the court that this was super sensitive information. Judge Boasberg, though, generously allowed the administration to file its answers ex parte and under seal. But this was still not good enough for the Trump administration, which decided that it didn't want to answer the judge's questions at all, and instead filed a motion to stay the judge's order to disclose details about the flights, claiming that, quote, the court's continued intrusions into the prerogatives of the executive branch, especially on a non-legal and factually irrelevant matter, should end. Defense, quote, micromanaged and unnecessary judicial fishing expeditions, and claimed that, quote, there is no serious dispute that the government complied with the minute order. But the Trump administration argued that it needed the stay because it was evaluating whether to invoke the state secret privilege to portions of the information the court was seeking, and that a stay was warranted while the appeal to the DC Circuit was pending. Defendants also threw in a few arguments about how the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act wasn't reviewable by the court, and, just to add insult to injury, stated outright that they did not trust Judge Boasberg to not share the ex parte information with the plaintiff, stating, quote, the government does not currently have any assurance at this time that information provided to the court on an ex parte basis would not subsequently be provided to the plaintiffs or the general public before the government could seek appellate review of that further disclosure. But Judge Boasberg was not having it. He granted the government an additional day to provide the information, but sternly called defendants out in their non-compliance, stating, quote, to begin, the court seeks this information.
Most of them are actual criminal scum, though. You mean the administration? Yeah. People in the White House? I agree.
Not as micromanaged and unnecessary judicial fishing expedition.
This right here betrays reality, and it shows that you still, in spite of your fascist rhetoric, have a conscience inside of you eating away at your brain, your heart, your soul. What do I mean by this? Because you have to fantasize about these people that are unjustly sent to the slave labor camp being violent criminal scum. It's clear that there's no evidence for that. Okay, it's very clear that there's no evidence for that. That's precisely the reason why they're violating due process. It's the whole reason why this is fucking happening to begin with. This back and forth in the judicial system is occurring. But you ultimately think it is impossible. Like, it has to, these people have to be violent criminals. I'm going to fantasize that they are violent criminals in your mind. I'm not talking about the guy who got deported. Who are you talking about? This conversation is entirely about people that have been deported in an unjustifiable manner due to erroneous claims made by the Department of Homeland Security without any due process whatsoever. In your mind, you're fantasizing about an invisible criminal doing invisible crimes that you haven't actually had the state prove, not recognizing that the erosion of due process will inevitably harm you as well, because when the state decides that there's no need for due process, that means you can be branded a criminal without any evidence whatsoever, and then shipped off to a fucking El Salvador slave colony, and then never to be returned, by the way, from said slave colony. These are all the fucking different ways in which the government is operating. But in your mind, you're like, oh, well, I hope that they're all criminal scum, because otherwise, what is the reason for all of this brutality? because you cannot, in good conscience, recognize that the American government is the one that is doing the wrong here. About all the rest of them, the ones that aren't even shipped from the US, what are you talking about, dude? What the fuck are you talking about? There's been numerous investigative reports that have been conducted on who has been deported. 75% of those deported to SCOTUS had no criminal record nor any allegations against them. 75%. And in the 25% that they have, not all of them are fucking gang members to begin with. Their crimes are things as silly as like trespassing. The American president is a convicted felon. He is literally more of a real criminal than the fucking people that are being deported. You understand?
But to determine if the government deliberately flouted its orders issued on March 15th, 2025.
Yeah. One dude driving a bike in the wrong lane. Yeah, it's just like parking tickets. Parking tickets, dude. It's fucking nuts.
And if so, what the consequences should be. And Judge Boasberg.
And if your argument is, oh no, I was just talking about all the people that are MS-13 and SCOTUS prior, okay, you do understand. Even the people, yeah, exactly. Even the people in that prison already are not all fucking criminals, dumb fuck, chatter. SCOTUS is a horrendous fucking terror camp. Do you even know the process in which these people get shipped into this facility internally inside of El Salvador? Do you know the process? Do you know how it works? Government stooges come to your house overnight, black bag you, put you in a room where a fucking judge is wearing a balaclava, 300 people at a time. That judge wearing the balaclava decides all 300 are actually MS-13. It's over. That's it. That's what it takes to get to SCOTUS. That's what it gets. That's what it takes for you to be disappeared inside of El Salvador. So no, even the people that are in that prison are not all violent scumbags and criminals.
Expressed surprise at the government's claims of secrecy and referenced Secretary Rubio's post on Twitter, proudly sharing details about the plane's arrival in El Salvador. The judge also blasted the administration for appearing to flout his order, stating, quote, as the Supreme Court has made crystal clear, the proper recourse for a party subject to an injunction it believes is legally flawed, and is indeed later shown to be so flawed, is appellate review, not disobedience. So while the fight over disclosing the flight details was ongoing, the administration also moved to vacate the temporary restraining order, arguing that Judge Boasberg had no jurisdiction over the case and that the plaintiffs had not satisfied the TRO requirements. Judge Boasberg declined to vacate the TRO and rejected the Trump administration's arguments that he could not consider the case, finding that, quote, the court need not resolve the thorny question of whether the judiciary has the authority to assess this claim in the first place. That is because plaintiffs are likely to succeed on another equally fundamental theory. Before they may be deported, they are entitled to individualized hearings to determine whether the act applies.
I'm done. I can't talk about this anymore. I'm tired. I'll cover it tomorrow in terms of like the Supreme Court decision. I want to move on to some other stuff. We'll cover the Supreme Court decision and what's going on, because I'll do the SCOTUS due process video later. I didn't realize that we were on the wrong video anyway. I fucking clicked on the wrong one.